you. My name is Becca Warren. I live in Heartland. I work at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, neighbor representative. I'm the Farm to Plate Food Security Project Manager, and I'm here today with other Farm to Plate staff, with Farm to Plate members who are here to testify or answer questions, and watching online. We're here kind of bursting at the seams with excitement to share the Vermont Food Security Roadmap to 2035 with you. The roadmap charts the path for the state of Vermont to make policy choices that will ensure food security for everyone that lives here by 2035. So to ensure that everyone in Vermont has the food they need every day. And we're particularly glad to share our excitement with you all today at the House Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee. It was your decision to create the Farm to Plate Network 13 years ago that led to the partnerships and strategies that were able to allow us to make the food security roadmap and will lead to food security in 2035. The Vermont Farm to Plate Strategic Plan directed us to improve healthy local food for all Vermonters. And we did that by creating a detailed, implementable roadmap to food security, which we spent 2 years developing. And we really surprised ourselves with what a powerful and impactful roadmap this is. Your Farm to Plate vision has led to a powerful coalition committed to working with you to achieve this transformational plan. So today, we'll give an overview of the roadmap. You'll hear from organizations about their commitment to executing the roadmap, and we'll share how our collective action is successful because the state took leadership on food security. We'll start with testimony from Honore Horton of Hunger Free Vermont. Joey LaHoulier of Footprint Farm will join us via Zoom, as will Monica Collins from Feeding the Valley. Then I will give a bit of detail on the walkthrough of the roadmap, and then we'll hear from Abby Willard and Stephanie Bergen about the commitment of the Agency of Agriculture and the Department of Health. The roadmap shows us how to ensure that everyone in Vermont has the food they need, and it's organized into 3 goals that we wish to achieve and we will achieve by 2035. The goals and the objectives and strategies they contain are based on the expertise of over 600 people in Vermont who took the time to share their opinions, expertise, and personal knowledge of food security. So the 3 goals we will reach by 2035 are: the government ensures food security for all in Vermont. Vermont farms have the resources to be resilient, and communities have the tools to support food security. And Honore, Joey, and Monica are going to share how these goals are important to their work in Vermont. And Honore is going to kick us off. Thank you. And I'll be back after Monica speaks. Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me again. I'm Honore Horton. I'm a resident of Williston, Vermont, and I'm the executive director of Hunger Free Vermont. And I'm also a member of the steering committee that has been working for 2 years to compile the responses from those 600 people that Becca mentioned into what you have before you. And it's really been an honor to be part of this process. And I really developed a passion for being engaged in the work of creating this food security roadmap out of another role that I have held, which is as one of the founding members of the Mass Feeding Group. And that was a group created by Vermont's SEOC in the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, when it became painfully obvious to all of us that the pandemic was also a hunger crisis and was going to be an ongoing hunger crisis. And also that food access and food security weren't very effectively woven into Vermont's state emergency response systems. And so the Mass Feeding Group came into place to try to help coordinate between state agencies and nonprofit entities accountable for food security in Vermont to better make those systems respond to the need in that crisis. And the Mass Feeding Group is continuing to this day because we saw the value of that as a place where state agencies and nonprofits can keep in regular communication and strategize together around making sure that we're achieving food security. So the value of the Mass Feeding Group and the realization that the goal of food security is not consistently well integrated into government operations led directly to my enthusiastic desire to be part of helping to create the Vermont Food Security Roadmap. And all of us are here today not to explain the whole roadmap to you, because that would take more hours than even the time you have generously allotted to us today. But we're here really to hope to infuse you with the same passion that we all feel for creating a future of food security for everyone in Vermont. So every time that we got together over this long period of time to work on creating the food security roadmap, we paused and we tried to imagine what it would be like if we were standing in 2035 and we knew that everybody in Vermont had food security and climate resiliency, and that our agricultural sector was thriving and providing for our people. And I invite everybody in this room right now to pause for a moment and imagine that day. Imagine that hidden hunger does not exist in Vermont because everyone has the food we need. Imagine the possibilities available to us as a state when nobody in Vermont is hungry. Imagine that we had all worked together in our mutually supporting roles to create permanent, equitable, Vermont-grown food security for all. How proud, how joyous, how fulfilled we would be, and we would all feel to know that we had dedicated our lives and our work to achieving this outcome and that we had succeeded. And I really believe, I've been at Hunger Free Vermont for 13 years and worked in a lot of different ways to support more people in Vermont having food security in a permanent and dignified way. And I really, really believe that this roadmap is achievable and that if we follow this roadmap, we will end hunger in Vermont by 2035. So the Vermont Food Security Roadmap leads with the goal that our government ensures food security for all in Vermont. This doesn't mean that our government does everything around food security, but without government leading, we won't fulfill the roadmap by 2035. None of us would be in this room today, actually, if we did not believe that food security is a policy choice that we can make. We know this is true because of all the policy choices that this committee and this legislature has already made and that have already put us on the road to food security in Vermont. So we're already using this roadmap and we're already on this road. Just a few examples. You created and funded the state Farm to School and Early Childhood Grants program. You created and funded the Vermont Farm to Plate Network, as Becca already mentioned. You created and funded the local food purchasing incentive program for our schools. You've begun to support our critical Meals on Wheels and charitable food networks with budget funding. My personal favorite, of course, is that you made Vermont the 6th state in the country to provide permanent universal school meals for all students in all of our public schools. And you've supported Vermont farmers and Vermont producers in many innovative ways that others are better equipped to describe to you than I am, since that is not my area of expertise. And in this current legislative session, we have a lot of new opportunities to keep hiking down this road to food security and to get to the next hut together, if you will. You can provide additional base funding for the Vermont Food Bank Network and for Meals on Wheels. You can provide funding to NOFA Vermont to support the continuation of the Crop Cash program. You can pass H703, which is a bill that would launch the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program here in Vermont and move toward giving Three Squares Vermont a boost, so food benefits are adequate for more Vermont households. You can pass H701 to expand the Vermont Earned Income and Child Tax Credits so that lower income working families can keep more of what they earn. You can support the Land Access and Opportunity Board and Working Lands Program. And these are just a few of the opportunities that are also part of the food security roadmap and that are on the table here in the State House this session. So all of these policy initiatives support and inform the Vermont food security roadmap that we're presenting to you today. And you can see that our collective action has already begun and is more necessary now than ever to ensure food security across Vermont in times of crisis. And we've certainly had plenty of that lately, and also in times of calm, which we hope are coming soon. We look forward to continuing our work together, and we thank this committee for leading the way. And I'm now going to hand things over to Joey LaHoulier of Footbrook Farm, who is joining remotely.
Well, before you do that,
Oh, yes,
can I just ask or make sure the committee doesn't have any questions?
of course.
Based on what you had to say. Okay, I don't see any hands, so thank you.
Thank you.
And Joey?
Yes, hello. Good
Welcome.
afternoon. Thank you for having me. So I'm Joey LaHoulier. My husband Tony and I own the Footbrook Farm in Johnson, Vermont. We're just west of the village. We grow organic vegetables and fruit. We have 7 greenhouses and we have about 30 acres in production. So we wholesale through Deep Root. We wholesale to Hunger Mountain Co-op and a couple other small accounts right here in Vermont. Our pride and joy though is our farm stand, which is right on site here at the farm. And it's open from June to November. And it acts more like a store. It's fully staffed 7 days a week from 9 to 6 every day. The one thing after I read the roadmap was I was just if we could make this happen, it would absolutely be amazing. I am so grateful that all this work was being done to help, our community, but also farms. There's a lot in this roadmap that would really, really help. And I know I see every day when our farm stand is open, the challenges and the needs that my community has for healthy whole foods. You probably heard that we were hit really bad by the flood, the village of Johnson and our farm, and we lost our grocery store like a lot of other towns lost theirs. We thought they were coming back and then they decided not to. Of course, that was the second worst flood we've ever had in July. We had somebody else interested in that location, and then we had our fourth worst flood in December. So there are no plans right now for a new grocery store to come in. So that makes me and my little farm stand just that more important for my community. We have 2 convenience stores and a Dollar General. And we're grateful to have those, but that's not where you're going to get real nutritional fresh food. So there are in the roadmap, there's a lot to talk about with, the crop cash and the farm match program that is through NOFA. Those directly really help our farm and really helped us get back on our feet after the flood. So my immediate request would be to fund the $478,000 that is, I believe, going to be included into the budget, that you could fund that program in the immediate. That would be incredibly helpful. There's a lot about in the roadmap that talks about, the Vermont farms needing the resources to be resilient. It is definitely up to us as the farm and as a small business to be ready to be resilient in these different weather climates that we're having. And we're doing a lot on the farm to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for what could happen next. But one thing that was very difficult after the flood was we took all the steps that we thought we needed to. We were watching the NOAA site. We did not anticipate the amount of flood that we received. So we were not prepared. So we're doing some preparations on our own, but having an emergency fund available immediately would have definitely lessened some of the huge stress that we had in the beginning. Most farms, July is the worst time to have a flood because you put all your money into growing the crops. They're ready to pick and now they're gone. And we had 15 employees that we needed to take care of. And without a GoFundMe, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And we would have had to close and send everybody home. So please consider this roadmap because there's some important things in there that could have protected us early on. I do want to say thank you, though. The state came through for us hugely, and we are looking forward to having a successful year next year with the help of that. So I am very grateful. Thank you for letting me speak today and for considering putting this road map into action. I really hope it can happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joey. And you mentioned the state coming through. Was that through the form of a grant this fall?
Specifically the BGAP grants, but there were many grants that were offered through different agencies, and I applied for anything and everything that came our way. It was really just that first month or those first couple weeks. Again, if the flood had happened later on in the season, we probably could have financially dealt with it much better, but because it was just at the worst time, we really needed help immediately. But again, those BGAP grants were extremely helpful to make sure that we could be in business for next year.
You mentioned that your farm stand is open seasonally, so it's not open right now, for example. Yeah.
It's not. Had I had, we lost at least 75% of our crops. If I still had enough crops or things to sell, I would have stayed open longer and I would have been able to provide more food to the food shelf in Johnson, which we do when we have those. But yeah, the flood made it hard for me to stay open later and to be able to help those agencies that I usually do.
We have a question from Representative Lipsky.
Joey, Jed Lipsky from Memorial One. I assume, are you upstairs in your farm stand?
Yes.
Because it's stunning, the joinery, and I hope that wasn't the flood didn't come up that high. It wiped out the ground floor in the flood.
It did not. It came within about 10 feet of the farm stand. The farm stand's about a half a mile from the Lamoille. So it came really close, but it did not come in, which was incredibly helpful to have the farm stand. Really was the thing that was, I had to buy in product from other farms, but I live in a pretty great place and there are some other farms around. So I bought in product from them that helped me keep the farm stand going, keep the food moving out and keeping us with our employees. So no, the farm stand is safe.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Then thank you, Joey. If you want to stay and listen, of course you may. And then Monica, you're up next.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Monica Collins, and I'm a resident of Hancock and the director of a local volunteer nonprofit called Feeding the Valley Alliance. We serve the communities of Rochester, Hancock, and Granville by distributing fresh food at no cost to residents in need. On Friday, in fact, we will be distributing Veggie Van Go produce to 42 families. That's families, not individuals. And we are a collection of very small towns in central Vermont. Our funding comes from grants and donations. And I also work at Vermont Law and Graduate School with master's students, helping them find jobs, many of whom focus on food and agriculture law and policy. I became part of the steering committee for the roadmap because I felt it was critical to have representation from small rural organizations and communities, given the different challenges we face. I've worked on farms. I'm a former select board chair, a current regional planning commission rep for my community, and someone who has experienced food insecurity. The focus of my message today is that there are existing tools for communities to work with to ensure food access in general and in the context of emergency preparedness and resilience. An example is the Farm to Plate Network's Local Planning for Food Access Toolkit, which was published in 2019, shortly before the pandemic began, and understandably the focus changed, but now it's 2024, and the toolkit should be something that communities are aware of to incorporate food access planning into their town plans. This information will help keep issues like access to farmland, economic development for local food stores. My community, my valley lost its local food store this spring, but we have it back now. And emergency management in mind as they update their plans. Where I see the disconnect is that there's often funding available for planning, and that's great, but the same level of funding isn't readily available for implementation of these plans. So town plans, hazard mitigation plans, local emergency management plans are all great tools that can incorporate food security, but smaller communities don't often have dedicated employees to do this work, and they can't afford them. They operate mostly through volunteers, and frankly, it's proving difficult to find people who have the time, energy, and as the issues increase in complexity, the skills to do all the work that needs to be done. You can help us make this work a reality by supporting the local decision makers who know their villages and towns, help us with capacity building and funding to empower the participation of local residents who know their communities. I truly believe that this roadmap will lead to food security, but we will need your support in order to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Any questions from the committee? All right, not seeing any. So we'll turn it back over, at least for the moment, to Becca.
Yeah, I'll come back. And I'm just going to give a short overview of the statewide engagement process that we used, and then walk a little bit through the roadmap document itself. And then we'll hear from Abby and Steph. So 2 more testimonies. So to make the roadmap, the Farm to Plate Network members, who we think we had representatives from over 120 member organizations in Farm to Plate participating. The Farm to Plate members were joined by UVM researchers, partner organizations from other sectors such as transportation, and Vermonters who contributed their personal experience with food security or the lack thereof. And together we designed and implemented a statewide community outreach effort to gather the successes and obstacles that are experienced in Vermont by Vermonters. So we gathered guidance from people at food shelves, farmers markets, hunger councils, and other venues. We gathered input from farmers and professionals and from people who are actively building food security for themselves and for their neighbors. A particular effort was made to gather guidance from people who the Department of Health has identified at most at risk by the lack of, or most impacted by the lack of food security in Vermont. So that's individuals who identify as Black, Latinx, Indigenous, people of color, people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, other queer identities, people who live rurally, people living with poverty, and people living with a disability. So from all that feedback, we had around 600 people participate, gave their ideas and opinions about how to create food security in Vermont. We were joined by a UVM researcher who analyzed all the community feedback for us. And then small groups built the goals and objectives within the roadmap out of that feedback. So those of us testifying today participated in the final writing process, but the contents of the roadmap itself all are based on input from around the state. So let's look at the roadmap now, and I will explain how it's organized. So if we turn to page 14. Okay, this is what it looks like. So all the pages before page 14 give more detail into what I just went over, how we created the roadmap, legislative participation, all those things. Everything after page 15 is outlining the goals and the objectives and strategies to achieve the goals. So you can see here on page 14, we have a graphic that's the anatomy of an objective. So everything after this page looks like this. So the goal is at the top. Then we have an objective with a handy number and letter. We have text explaining why the roadmap is important and will help us create food security by 2035. On the right-hand side of the spread are the specific strategies. Some of these are very detailed due to our shared recent experience with struggling with food security during climate and pandemic disasters. And then down here, throughout the document are direct quotes from the community feedback and input that we gathered. So you can see examples of what was said from around the state related to this topic. And on this page,
Okay, sorry.
Yes, please.
Sorry. For folks who might be watching online,
yes,
not participating today, but watching later, or watching it live, is this online right now?
yes.
Accessible to anybody?
Yep, it's on at the Farm to Plate, Vermont Farm to Plate website. So that's vermontfarmtoplate.com.
And
If
we,
you
I don't know
scroll
whether
down
we
and go
have
to
it.
resources.
It's on our committee
It's the
page,
town
too.
resource. On
And
the
yeah.
Farmington website under the resources.
And it's also on this committee page. I'm just learning how that works, but I did submit it, so
We have it, I'm looking at it.
great, wonderful. So I was just going to wrap up by saying these are the three major goals and the objectives underneath them. And so Honor, Joey, and Monica each touched on some of these goal areas and objectives that are very important to their work and the people that they're supporting in their communities and with their organizations. And I'm just going to move, if there are any questions about this. And then
I think this is very straightforward and helpful.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So I'll just move and introduce Abby and Stephanie, who have just been incredible partners representing the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and the Department of Health throughout the entire process. The state recognized the urgency and the need for a shared path to food security in Vermont and provided significant funding and staff support. So our collective action has been successful because the state stepped into leadership on this front with food security. So we'll start with Abby Willard from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and then Stephanie Bergen is participating remotely and she's with the Department of Health.
Thank you. Representative Lipsky, did you have a question for Rebecca?
I do. Before we move on to Abby, the testimony from Monica and from Joey really struck a chord, not just for this committee, but in the Rural Caucus and flood resiliency and recovery, big issues beyond here. And I would love to hear from those two communities. I'm very familiar with Johnson and their total loss of, other than the convenience stores and, you know, Joey sort of bookended by a convenience store and Dollar General, but it's devastating for that community. We, the state, the Rural Caucus, our committee need interaction from those communities. Where can a market be in Johnson, not at the junction of the Gihon River and the Lamoille River, likely in the future? And the same, you know, when you come out of Hancock, the headwaters of the White River, out of Granville Gulf down in through Rochester. You know, they have this narrow valley, steep watersheds, and they're get hammered in Pittsfield and Stockbridge. So that testimony wasn't casual. It really is critical to some of the challenges, not just we as a committee, but as a legislature need to address. Those watersheds and vulnerabilities, we need help. They need help. We'd like to be productive. Thank you.
I don't know whether, whether Joey, if you had any thoughts on that, if you're still listening on location for a store, the floodplain right next to the raging rivers, not going to be the best location, as we've seen from the owner closing up and no one else wanting to take that spot.
Yeah.
Representative Levitt.
One of the issues, I'm sort of quickly scanning this, is in a lot of rural communities, I'm thinking of, mine, Grand Isle, we have one supermarket, but there's no other place to build anything. So you not only can you, it's not just a matter of taking over an empty storefront or even converting a house. You'd have to actually physically build something from the ground up, which in a lot of rural communities, I think does happen. You don't have a lot of available housing stock to just convert or commercial. So it adds an additional expense for rural places, rural towns of where are you going to build this? Because you need not just conversion money, but you need actually from the ground up. And I think that just adds to the expense of being nimble when confronted with these kinds of disasters.
Monica?
Sure. So we had our local grocery store closed kind of abruptly in April, I believe. And we are easily 30 to 45 minutes away from any local grocery store that carries healthy, fresh food. So we put together, Feeding the Valley was part of putting together a conversation with the community to find out what was needed. We had over 150 people show up, either online or in person, which was amazing. I thought I was going to be looking at a group of 30 people, but so many people were so concerned with this. But shortly after that, and all these wonderful ideas that came out of that conversation happened, the store was bought by somebody who actually tuned in and watched the meeting. And that's great because we really needed that. We have a lot of seniors who can't travel long distances. We don't have a ton of transportation available to us. There's very little public transportation in our valley. But my concern is what happens if this owner, who actually lives in Plattsburgh, decides that they're going to pull up stakes and leave. We need to have a resilient food system on the local level so that we can weather these crises as they come up. And I think that more encouragement and empowerment for local communities to talk about these issues, to include discussions about local food systems in their planning is really, really critical.
All right, thank you. So Abby, I think you were going to be next.
Afternoon.
Yeah.
It's okay. Abby Willard from my Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Development Division, as well as the agency's representative on the Food Security Roadmaps Steering Committee. So this is really exciting. We just keep kind of looking back at this actual kind of physical manifestation of 2 years of work in this roadmap. It's really exciting to kind of see it all together and now kind of ready for public dissemination. And I'm just really grateful for all the effort and all the coordination that went into getting to this point in the roadmap. Our agency is really excited about this roadmap and proud of both the bold and what feels attainable goal to end hunger in Vermont by 2035. And appreciative that the strategies in this roadmap really make that critical link between food security and food production, and that vision that and the concept that food security depends upon viable agricultural sectors in our state. So I feel like I'm aware, and I suspect that you also would agree that we can't talk about community viability without addressing hunger. And we can't talk about supporting families without considering local food production. And we can't talk about Vermont's kind of unique and special culture without investing in our future farmers. And that we really will struggle as a state to achieve economic viability if we can't find ways to feed ourselves, and that we have to recognize that that's dependent upon viable and productive farms. So that's a heavy load. That's a big lift. That's a lot of systems and a lot of resources that need to be deployed to many of these kind of like critical needs. And, given yesterday's budget address, like there are many critical social service needs that we're trying to address as a state. And I think just the importance of this roadmap coming out now is to acknowledge that there are these additional systems that will also continuously need our support for us to achieve this goal of ending hunger by 2035. So just acknowledging that there's strategies and a vision within this roadmap around the importance of providing resilient resources to our communities, to our families, and to our farms. And this inextricable link really resonates with the mission and the work of the Agency of Agriculture, which is why out of our fiscal year 23 budget was the $150,000 that our agency contributed to the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund in support of kind of all the efforts to both develop and publish this food security roadmap. And again, as we all have heard in so many of our conversations in this testimony, the COVID-19 experience, as well as, what Joey and Monica shared about the impacts of this July flood, really demonstrated the fragility of our food system and of our supply chain, the value of having local producers and local food production to care for and feed our communities, and the value in having that local food system structure to support and care for one another in our small rural communities of Vermont. So the agency, as Becca mentioned, was involved in the roadmap process from the beginning, during those early public engagement efforts and the first collection of voices and perspectives of Vermonters. And I'll say one of my favorite aspects of this roadmap is just sort of reading the voices of Vermonters. I really appreciate that kind of the vision, and then the final publication is really highlighting kind of the voices of the 600 some odd folks that contributed to the publication and the kind of the direction that this roadmap took. And so again, recognizing the fragility of our supply chain and really developing these focus areas. There's 4 that are related to agriculture. So beginning on page 32, I think, is where there's the 4 agricultural kind of focus areas and the 12 strategies, which again are obviously, part of this collective effort, but, most kind of familiar to me in my work within the Agency of Agriculture. And yet, when we look at these strategies, they're not wholly new. And I think though many of them will be very familiar. A lot of these recommendations were, part of the climate action plan, or were recommendations that showed up in the various reports from the Future of Agriculture Commission, and represent further detail and processing of ideas that were in Vermont's Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan. So again, like we keep kind of recognizing these important themes and this important work that continues as some policy choices that we need to make to ensure that farms have the resources to be resilient and to focus on solutions to ensure that everyone in Vermont has the food that they need. So there are strategies in this roadmap that address the supply chain infrastructure development efforts. And we've talked about that many times in this committee, and work of the Agency of Agriculture with support for the ag development grants that you all advocated for that support infrastructure growth within our meat, maple, and produce sector. Much of the work of the Working Lands Program, and the one-time federal appropriation that we've had the good fortune to receive through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's the $4.5 million it's entitled the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Investments, that's focused on that middle of the supply chain. So looking at aggregation and distribution and storage and value-added processing to ensure that businesses are both viable within their community to be able to serve and feed people, but also to be able to reach and expand their markets out of state. There's strategies in this roadmap that address land access models that will require some really focused and creative attention to conserve and access agricultural lands. I think especially right now as we're seeing pressure mounting around the utilization of open land as to whether it's to be used for agriculture and food production, and or the pressures of housing and development. And the agency's engaged in a project that's cataloging and then inventorying, quantifying Act 250 on-site mitigation parcels to see how many of those areas which are to be dedicated into perpetuity for agriculture are actually in viable current agricultural production. There's also strategies in this roadmap that highlight the appreciation for farmers and to agriculture for the wise use of our natural resources and the management of our state's lands. And so in relation to that, the agency, out of the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group that was a collaborative process for about a year and a half, was the creation of the Vermont Farmer Ecosystem Stewardship Program, which creates payments to support farms for their whole ecosystem benefits that they provide to land and community. And that builds off the NRCS, so the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service program called Conservation Stewardship Program. So I think there's many initiatives in here that we're starting to see, or we have had some activity around. But what's really exciting to me most of all about kind of the publication of this roadmap and the work that's happened over the past 2 years is that this plan outlines strategies that if we invest in agriculture and if we support economic viability, we will be able to ensure that our families, our communities, and our farms have the resources that they all need to be resilient. And that is that day that we could all envision that Anor kind of asked us to imagine. And when we did the exercise, it was an emotional moment to recognize that so many of those essential needs that members of our community or members of our family or us individually have experienced or currently struggle with could be alleviated. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Abby. I think we're trying to schedule some time next week to have perhaps you and Secretary in to talk about budget.
Okay.
Is there anything that you're in a position to say now about the budget that might be related to any of the goals? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Yeah.
And if not, when you're back next week, if there is you try and make that, it might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's talk about it next week. I mean, so we all heard the budget address yesterday, and we obviously support the board's recommend there are not one-time appropriations within the Agency of Agriculture. But there is the maintenance of our one-time, of our base allocation for the Working Land Program and our other established programs around farm to school in particular. So, yeah, I think we can dig into those and how those could help achieve some of the vision and the goals that are outlined in this roadmap. And then I guess the last thing I would just say, maybe we talk about this project conversation. It's okay. Is if there's other than budget conversations, more policy related strategies that we can explore.
Questions? Representative Cole.
I have a question about a part of this report here, and I don't know who the appropriate person would be, but maybe it's that.
Okay. Depends on what the question is.
The emergency response system.
Uh-huh.
I'm
What's
curious.
that? Which page?
This is 23 and 22. I was skimming over the 1 through 5 strategies.
Yeah.
But, I was wondering if there was more of like I heard from a few farmers who struggled with the diversity and intensity of different applications for different grant programs to try to have, some recovery funds there. And I'm curious if it was brought up to make more of a universal form, like you just have to submit it once to at least have your name in the pool of different programs to apply for, or if that wasn't a part of the emergency response system.
Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate that comment and question, and we too have heard that same concern. And I am hopeful that there is an opportunity for us to sort of streamline that process for applicants. And I think that's the idea around having some sort of a reserve fund that could at least be activated in the time of an emergency. But even outside of that, I think that the Agency of Agriculture would at least like to be part of a process with other members of the Mass Feeding Group and SEOC to be thinking about, like, how can we have collaboration across agencies and across programs? Universal application is something that we've talked, or a universal grant application is something that we've talked about. And we're starting from a place in state government where we have, I think there was, the report demonstrated like 1,500 different granting tools that we're using in state government currently for granting and contracting, which is far from the strategy and the vision that you're outlining that the industry would benefit from. But I think acknowledging the value of moving to like one universal system, or at least having some universal application questions or a simpler process to be able to more expeditiously access funding, especially in a time of an emergency. Did I not get to your question?
Oh, no, you totally did. That's super helpful.
Page 33, that is actually one of the strategies is to streamline application approval.
Oh, okay.
For farm support programs, just so you have that.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And my other question was, on top of that, like providing support for farmers in the grant applying process.
Yeah.
Because, it's not necessarily everyone's specialty. I'm wondering if you employ the help of conservation districts, because I know that they work alongside farmers a lot of times for different projects. I don't know about emergency related projects, but.
Yeah, so when I think, so we've had like 2 big emergencies in a relatively short period of time between the pandemic and then this July flood and then resulting growing season that was pretty disastrous for agriculture. And I think we have had varying success and kind of like bringing together the different partners to talk about how do we streamline the access and how do we make sure that all the information is being shared. So during the pandemic, there were frequent kind of like stakeholder partner calls to talk about like what are the most recent resources that are available, when does PPP become live and when do you apply for this program? And I feel like that was a really well coordinated effort to make sure that service providers that were connecting with farmers were feeling communicated with about the collaborative opportunities that were available. And conservation districts are a part of that mix, as was the Farm and Forest Viability Network. We implored the READY program, which is specifically designed to do grant writing in rural communities. During the July flood, I think we did the same effort, and I will just admit, I don't think to the same level of success. I think we had a few of those stakeholder calls, and we started to talk about resources and opportunities. And then I think we shifted the focus a little bit to be like, the philanthropic community was sort of out in front with resources early and like right after the event. Then the BGAP program came, and we thought that was going to be able to like address all of the needs. The agency put out this survey that was designed to sort of capture what the losses were. And I admittedly, I think we should have and could have continued to have more of those like stakeholder conversations to make sure that conservation districts and other on the ground kind of extension and other partners were feeling more informed about what farmers needed. We then stood up the Ag Recovery Task Force, which was really designed to be, while there's the State Emergency Operations Center, each agency can have, and then the Mass Feeding Group, there's designed to be like each agency can have, or each sector could have its own kind of response process. And the Ag Recovery Task Force was designed to be that. And we started it pretty late in the process. That report from that task force is in its final drafts and will hopefully be shared soon, like I would think within a couple weeks, if not sooner, that has some recommendations again around a universal application, making dollars more available more quickly. So conservation districts are part of the mix, and there's many other service providers across the state that also were very valuable and helped connect businesses to resources. And we still need more. I think there's still just the general sense that some farmers got missed. I remember talking to a farmer who called just a week and a half ago that was like, I wondered if there was any state assistance. I finally figured out what my business losses were as a result of the flood. Or even Joey acknowledging that they're still kind of assessing like what the losses are. And we do not have great state resource support for the businesses at this moment in time. Like the grant programs are closed and the philanthropic community's opportunities have ended. And many businesses have been supported, but not all. And some of it was like access to information, and some of it was, not maybe having the right technical service provider connection with information to the business.
Yeah. I'm looking at your strategy, and I'm just wondering, you say collaboration among farmland owners. One thing I'm not seeing that I'd love to see is succession planning.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I don't know how you have that conversation. I'm the only thing I can compare it to is my district, where one family owns like 2,500 acres.
Yep.
Between two towns of farmland that's right on Route 2. The dad died, and now it's the younger dad. I guess the grandfather. That's what it would be. Not the elder dad. As we say in our country, the elder dad passed. My Lord, I should have had more coffee. But I feel like that in some ways is a missing piece when we talk about farmland and the risk of losing farmland. And how do you acknowledge with a farmer who's got 2,500 acres? When I was in the planning commission in Charlotte, every farmer that came before said, all I have to give my kids is my land. And you don't want to take that away. But how do you protect that much land? Because some families own that much land. And how do you honor that? And how do you give them the money that land is worth, while still keeping it in farming, perhaps with a different farmer? Or I'm thinking Land Access Opportunity Board. That feels like a missing bridge to me.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you have thoughts on how we could build that bridge.
Yeah, I think we've talked about succession planning actually in this committee a fair bit of like, what's the Agency of Agriculture doing around succession planning? And I've never had a great answer for you, because I feel like it's not a program area that we have launched. It's not an appropriation that we have passed through to a partnering organization. But thankfully, I think farms are getting support from the Farm Viability Program. I think there are partners and service providers that are talking about succession planning. So I would say that the discussions are happening. I think we probably need more resources, like better tools, better examples.
Right.
I would say one of the benefits that I'm feeling from this New England Feeding New England 30 by 30 challenge or objective and goal, which is about building collaborations across the Northeast, the region, and talking about regional food access, has been learning about models in other states. And I feel like, again, sometimes we get a little insular and think that like we have all the best solutions and strategies here in Vermont. And actually, I think there's really great examples of succession planning that the Maine Farmland Trust is working on. And, you know, that other partners around the region could hopefully offer us some assistance with.
You said Maine Farmland Trust.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't want to say that it's not happening. I think it is, but I'm not sure that it's probably happening at the rate
I mean, I'm just
where the
wondering
demand exists.
if the Agency of Ag, if you all could just, I'm thinking, I used to own a bookstore and every year there was always these book trade shows. And every year there was always one workshop, succession planning.
Yeah.
How to sell your store. And I'm wondering if that's something you could just weave into the mix
Yeah.
of workshops that's offered, or maybe Farm to Plate can do that. But to get people thinking, you know, when the younger dad is in their 50s or 60s and say, you know, you want to start thinking about this. This is, and start even earlier. And as someone who was at that point trying to sell a bookstore, having that little nuggets and bringing in information from places like Maine or wherever, it made it seem less daunting.
Yeah.
And it was enormously helpful.
Yeah, one of the projects that the Working Lands program funds is some of those consulting services. They're focused on like, what should your organizational structure be? Like, what
Right,
should,
okay.
you know, like, should you be set up as a sole proprietor or as an LLC or something else? And so I think some of those resources are starting to be made available to businesses that apply, which that feels like it's moving in the right direction. But for the longest time, we sort of felt like, you know, do we have tax preparers? Do we have attorneys? Do we have, you know, business advisors that actually even have this in this kind of like specialized
Right.
intelligence? And I think that we're finding that we do. And now it's just the process of matchmaking the businesses that are at that stage in their family transition with the right subject matter experts. So I hope that we can continue kind of that work that Working Lands has funded to do more of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We, thank you, Abby.
You're welcome.
We're closing in on an hour, and we, as a committee, will be better listeners and more active participants if we take a short break. So I do want to be respectful of the time of our witnesses. So let's be ready to go right at 2.
Thank you.